All right, good evening, and thank you for attending our sewer system and rates 101 presentation. I know it's a few minutes after 5 o'clock, so we're going to get started. And I just want to just share a moment of gratitude. Thank you that you've spent the time to investigate what's happening with your sewer utility here in Gilbert. And with that, I'm going to jump right into a presentation. All right, so our overarching goal during this process is to keep the high-performing infrastructure that supports our community's way of life. There's a lot of work to be done to correct insufficient past investments in the maintenance and rehabilitation of the systems that allow us to enjoy these quality services. And if we don't follow through on this commitment to our community, then degradation, extreme incidents of service failures, and exponential emergency costs will be the future for Gilbert, as we have seen happen in numerous communities across the country. Our City of the Future initiative compels us to navigate a different direction than others have taken, so that Gilbert does not decline, but can remain a fertile community for the flourishment of our residents and businesses. Today, I'll take you on a journey through the sewer system where you'll discover our challenges and also the plans to meet those challenges head on. I want to remind you that you can enter questions into the chat as they come up, and at the end of the meeting, we will answer them to the best of our ability. We have to come face to face with the reality that's before us. Some parts of our sewer infrastructure are silently crumbling and are near total collapse. The condition of our infrastructure in maintaining reliable service is the underpinning for this entire conversation tonight. We have 3 500-foot sections of ductile iron pipe that cross under the 202 freeway. And this one highlighted is just north of Williamsfield Road. Although our goal is to inspect the entire system every 6 years, it's been 8 years since our last inspection of these pipes. And what we found just a couple of months ago was alarming. These dark spots that you see are holes where the iron pipe has corroded completely away. Ductile iron pipe was a best practice 20 years ago when these lines were installed, but are not anymore due to its corrosion potential. This gravity line is inside of a 24-inch steel casing that has concrete plugs at both ends, which is preventing sewage that may be leaking out of the sewer line contained and is helping prevent a sinkhole. But we don't know the extent of the corrosion that the casing may have as well. Now, our team has just completed camera inspections of all 3 of the pipes that are crossing the freeway, and we're actively pursuing emergency relining. And we've also expanded this inspection to other potential gravity pipelines and have already found one other significant issue crossing the railroad track. Catching this before a failure really shows the value of our routine inspections. And although these repairs will be costly, in the several million-dollar range, a sinkhole in the freeway would be life-threatening. It's just a snippet of some of the infrastructure that we're dealing with today in Gilbert. Now, there's an infrastructure funding gap that is national in scope. Every 4 years, the EPA sends Congress a report on infrastructure funding needs for clean water utilities, which are synonymous with sanitary and storm sewers. The EPA also does a survey for drinking water, which is separate from the one before you here. The EPA provided the estimate of $630 billion with a B over 20 years nationwide that's needed to bring these sewer systems back into the acceptable range for functionality. And Arizona's portion of that was $4.8 billion. So this issue is not unique to Gilbert, but we are aggressive in keeping our promise to the community for quality service, which is why we deal with our funding needs head on instead of passing them on to future generations. Now, oftentimes when you make a personal or a professional or even a team goal, you visualize what you want to become. We definitely do that in Gilbert with our City of the Future metrics and our performance management program. But sometimes it's more instructional to look at real-world examples of what you don't want to become to help guide your decision-making on the path you do want to take. Johnson Utilities was just a few miles southeast of us in the Santan Valley, and they were plagued with sewer overflows, undrinkable water and high utility bills for many years. Finally, the state took regulatory action and forced the sale of the utility to another private company called EPCOR. And they're making significant investments to bring the infrastructure up to standards. Sewage running through backyards and washes is not what we want to become in Gilbert. So tonight I'm going to share with you some of our pains as well as our plans to making sure we are a reliable and environmentally stable sewer and reclaimed water utility. Well, here we are again talking about a rate process. And it probably feels to you like there's a significant rate increase every year for the past 3 years. And that's because there was a 12-year gap with only one rate increase during that time, which left these utilities well behind in keeping pace with our rising expenses of the cost of service. Each year, we develop and review the budgets of all 4 of our utilities, but only make revenue adjustment requests for 2 of them each year, and only if they're needed. This year, the rate revenues are being reviewed for wastewater and for our environmental compliance fund. Last year, we reviewed water and trash service. Now, it should be noted that although these alternating year reviews are planned, it doesn't mean that we're going to bring forward a rate increase recommendation each time. And you can see that we even reduced the trash rates in both 2012 and in 2018. We always base our rate recommendations on the needs of the utility, along with the best available data to support those needs at the time that we made the recommendation. So we're in the middle of our timeline and our annual review schedule to review and adjust revenue. We kicked off the outward-facing process with the Public Works Advisory Board, which is the council-appointed advisory group of Gilbert residents that explores public works-related policy, rates, and projects to ensure continuity of services. That board was created to infuse the citizens' voice into this process. They have explored the services and projects in depth over the last several months, which has led to a recommendation that will be presented to you later on in this presentation. Our council received a much lengthier version of this presentation at their council retreat, and they had a robust discussion at the council meeting last month. And now we're in the middle of our required public noticing period with a few actions still ahead of us and for official action in February from the town council. So let's dive into the sewer system. We're going to go through a journey through the sewer system and the reuse system to understand what goes into uninterrupted service and how our 53 wastewater staff manage over $1 billion in infrastructure. Just looking through this diagram, you can see the sewer service begins at your house. When you flush the toilet or you take a shower, that water goes into a gravity sewer line. We have over 912 miles of gravity sewers in Gilbert that we have to maintain. We have to access that through 22,000 manholes in order for us to clean and inspect those sewer lines. Eventually, our sewer lines get very deep, and so we have to lift that water through what's called a lift station and a force main where we pressurize the sewage and lift it upwards so that it can continue on its path to the water reclamation plants. We've got 16 of those lift stations in Gilbert and 2 water reclamation plants that clean and purify the water. Finally, we discharge that water through 78 miles of reuse water pipelines at 3 recharge sites or over 75 reclaimed water customers in Gilbert. All of that infrastructure, we're going to go into a little bit more detail here, and you're going to see some of the difficulties we have with the maintenance and some of the repair plans we have in order to correct those difficulties. We do a lot of cleaning and inspection work on the gravity sewer system, which helps mitigate highly corrosive sewer gases that eat away at the infrastructure from the inside. And those sewer gases are also a nuisance for the community. Inspections help identify small issues before they could become big, like the photo at the bottom, which is a pipeline that has been bored through that our team discovered before it became a big problem. And sometimes they uncover big issues before they become catastrophes, like the video that you saw at the beginning of this presentation. Those inspections also help us identify future problem areas that can be corrected with capital projects, like in the case of our manhole rehabilitation project, which will fix hundreds of compromised manholes. And they guide our new odor and corrosion control stations in response to odor complaints that we've received. Our plan also includes additional future staffing to maintain those new odor control stations, which will be both proactive care for our pipes and a quality of life improvement for the community. As I mentioned before, lift stations are a vital function of our system. This photo on the left is of our largest lift station, called Crossroads. You can see the very large pumps behind Roy there and the force mains that lift that sewage to where it can be pushed to a gravity sewer to continue its journey to the water reclamation plant. That facility is 5 stories, and that skylight that you see is actually at ground level. It's all below grade. The map on the right highlights the lift station sewer sheds in Gilbert, showing that over 60% of our sewer flow passes through at least one lift station on its path to the plant, which is an indicator of how vital those lift stations are to uninterrupted service. Lift stations are costly to run and to maintain compared to gravity sewer lines, which is why we try to avoid their necessity in new developments. And unfortunately, breakdowns are a normal part of this kind of infrastructure, which is why our team does daily inspections and maintenance on the equipment to help us identify potential issues before they become calamitous. And we have had numerous calamities of these force mains just in the last decade. These are going to pop up on the map. The first one was at Greenfield Road in Queen Creek back in 2015. That issue cost $2 million for us to fix, which was likely only a $300,000 fix if it wasn't an emergency situation. In all of these emergencies, we see the cost to fix something is exponential in those emergency situations rather than routine replacement. In all, these emergencies cost $18 million in today's dollars to fix. And those didn't even solve the underlying issues that led to the breaks in the first place. That was $18 million in Band-Aids. Why do we pay such close attention to lift stations and force mains? Because the enormous impact that they can have when they break down. Since sewage generally only has one path to follow to the water reclamation plant, these excavations of a few of the major force main failures show what the pipes look like below ground, but not the havoc and the damage that is caused to the surface. The pipe fragments to the bottom right were actually still in service just a few months ago when our team proactively discovered their poor condition during an inspection. These findings were deeply concerning because we have a responsibility to keep this service running, and this condition of pipes is a harbinger of collapse. Had they not noticed this, we surely would have had another force main emergency on our hands. There's also an above ground impact that happens when these force mains break. Like I said earlier, sewage only flows one direction, and so we have to set up bypass pumping in cases where the rupture is big enough and complicated enough that the repair will take some time. In this case, these bypass pipes were in place for several months, crossing the Queen Road. Rivers and ponds of raw sewage running through gutters and into landscaped areas are not the kind of water features we want in Gilbert. And we know that you, our residents, want us to prevent them as well. These rate investments will keep us on the correct side of your desires for quality of life. The media loves a sinkhole because it's an obvious sign of a service failure, and we have gotten that coverage too. Thankfully, nobody was injured in this incident, but there was a strong possibility of that happening. This particular instance led us to do a condition assessment of our force mains, and we developed a prioritization list for rehab and resiliency of our force mains. We developed a subsequent capital improvement project to make those necessary improvements. It's a costly but vital series of projects over the course of 12 years to accomplish resiliency and reliability for our sewer customers. This project is called WW1050. It's a systematic replacement of those ductile iron pipe force mains that are the most likely to fail. As I mentioned earlier, it was an industry standard to install ductile iron at that time, but improvements in manufacturing technology for large diameter plastic pipes now means that we can replace those old standards with materials that will not corrode like the ductile iron. Those force mains are a single point of failure for us, meaning that there's no backup in place if one of those points fail, and we will be in emergency operations. The red lines on the map show the areas that are planned for rehab under this project. It's planned for $12 million a year on average for the next 12 plus years. Although this is an expensive project, the likely continued failure of those ductile iron pipes, coupled with the single point of failure, makes this an important priority for wastewater service. Well, we finally made it to our water reclamation plants in our journey, and we have drilled down with our council into the operations of the Greenfield Water Reclamation Plant. And we've shown them that the operation and maintenance costs of that plant over the next 5 years average $3.5 million above our previously budgeted amounts. This is due to a lot of contributing factors, including increased costs for chemicals, energy, and materials for the processes, growth in Gilbert's flow to the plant, and higher staffing costs. Additionally, we keep reinvesting into this plant so we get the full useful life out of this facility in order to maximize ratepayer return on their investment. These upward costs affect our need for more revenue per customer. We also have to do some reinvestment ongoing at the Neely Water Reclamation Plant, which is Gilbert's other plant. And we have a need to bring that plant back in line with the service standard that this community has come to rely on. Well, now that this water has been purified, we send it out through our reuse system, which is a foundational element of our sustainable water supply in Gilbert. Our goal of 100% of reuse is achieved through direct use in parks, golf courses, and HOA common areas, and then the recharge of the remaining reclaimed water into the aquifer. We've got a separate pipeline network for this water. We call it our purple pipes because they're actually purple in the ground to delineate them separately from our drinking water pipes. The riparian preserve is a vital resource for our water sustainability, which enables our full use of reclaimed water by recharging the aquifer and therefore maintaining equilibrium with our groundwater pumping. Back in 2012, we first identified the need to increase that facility capacity, and we developed a capital project to do that, but it's been on hold due to budgetary constraints ever since then. It's a critical project for the maximum use of our existing water resources, and using the existing water that we have is important, especially as we face a reduction of our Colorado River water supplies due to the drought on that river. Okay, we've made our way through the sewer and reclaimed water system, and now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of our capital improvement plans. Now, we have two types of capital plans that are funded solely by rates: the operations plan and the repair and replacement plan. You can think of the operations fund as an asset that is adding a new service level. So like one of those odor and corrosion controlled dosing stations that were not included in the original construction. A repair and replacement fund is when we are fixing an existing lift station pump that needs replaced because it's breaking down beyond repair. So repairing and replacing existing assets. Now, growth-related projects are not included in the rates. They are not funded by rates. Therefore, we're not discussing any projects that are growth-related today. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide, and I don't expect you to be able to read it, but I'm just going to describe for you what this is. This is a list of all of our capital projects in the operating and the repair and replacement fund and the years that they were slated to begin. Notice that our 5-year plan, as originally constituted, had most of the projects planned in fiscal year 25 and 26. This is a visualization of what a backlog looks like in a plan. Many of these projects were planned for fiscal year 23 and 24 in our last rate plan. But when it came time for council to adopt those rates, we had received new information that the incredible inflationary environment surrounding construction and operating costs had eaten away at nearly all of the additional revenue that the rate increase was going to gain for us. We had to use that revenue just to keep the utility running and had to push almost all of the projects off for 2 years, which we then added to the ones that were already planned in those years. Now, this glut of projects creates a real financial bump in the near term. That financial bump would have had a direct customer bill impact. So we have smoothed out many of those projects in order to also smooth out the financial impact for our customers. We had to balance the risk of pushing off these critical projects, which we tried to balance with the customer impacts, both of monthly bills, but also of the risk of interrupted service and environmental damage potential. This represents a $38 million delay of projects in our operating fund and $96 million of delay in our repair and replacement fund, just to soften the rate increases to the extent possible without compromising the integrity of our services. These delays were not incorporated. The rate recommendation would have been even higher. That initial capital plan represented a 160% rate increase. But we've left as much of that plan on the cutting room floor as possible through our risk and benefit process to get to the lower rate increase options that will be presented to you today. Now, I realize that that previous slide had so much information that it could be overwhelming. Looking at a list of dozens of projects can be difficult to sort through. So here's another way to visualize the categorization of these projects. We've got 4 main categories of these projects in our plan: rehabilitation, corrosion and odor control, service criticality, and efficiency and safety. It's a little bit easier to understand the goals we're aiming to achieve when it's looked through this lens. So when we add in the bullet list of each of these projects, it provides the context for the criticality of these projects. So as an example, you can pick any one of our odor control projects that are planned. Let's say the Western Canal Odor Control Dosing Project. The impact for the area nearby and also downstream of that site will be enormously improved. In that case, the Heritage District is directly downstream and will benefit. We heard from our customers, we heard odor complaints from people dining on the patio at the restaurants in the Heritage District. And we've developed that project in direct response to those problems. The projects that are recommended are based on our professional opinion of what is believed to be in the best interest of the community. If we had to push out any more projects, we could have severe consequences for service reliability and quality of life for our residents. These projects in total, $230 million within the 5-year plan. That's an average of $46 million a year, just on capital expenses. And our total current revenue is only $48 million a year. So clearly, an investment is required. So how do we go about paying for these needs? Well, let's talk about the details of utility funding. There's a few foundational pieces that we need to have in place to understand the financial picture of our utilities. The first is the difference between impact fees and rates. Impact fees are also known as system development fees. These are assessed when the new development occurs. These are based, calculated and assessed for the expansion-related improvements. So this includes expansion of a wastewater treatment plant or expansion of the wastewater collection system, like our sewer lines or our lift stations. This kind of makes up the adage that growth is required to pay for growth, and existing customers do not foot that bill. Impact fees are not used for operating the system. They're only used for installing the new system. Now, conversely, tonight we're talking about rates, which are a type of user fee. These are assessed every month based on the use or the level of service that the customer receives. They're calculated based on our cost of service model and then our rate study report that are posted on our Gilbert website. So the costs that are included in that are the operation and maintenance of the system, commodities and repair and replacement funds like we just went through, and debt service for any debt that we already have existing. These rates are not used to expand the system to accommodate growth. Additionally, we do not use these rates to support any general government services like police or fire, parks, or development services. Our council has also adopted a policy regarding user fees like the wastewater fund and the environmental compliance fund. These are called enterprise funds, which means that user fees have to be collected to recover the entire cost of operations. This means we do not subsidize these utilities. We only fund them through rates. We do not utilize tax funds to subsidize the rates, and we do not subsidize any government services through these rates. Now, this discussion and focus on our financial policies can be pretty academic, but it has real world implications on our community. If we do not follow our own financial policies that council has set, there will be consequences for us. We have to look no further than the news from November in Chicago, where the city council is attempting to sidestep hard financial choices, and the credit rating agencies are sounding the alarm. Lower credit rating affects our ability to build projects with frugality. So an example of this would be kind of bringing this into focus with a personal anecdote. If you consider that the average home price in Gilbert is about $600,000, purchasing that home with a very good credit rating of like 780 would cost about $3,000 a month to finance. But a person with an average credit score of 620 would pay $3,400 a month, 13% more just because of that credit downgrading. The same effect is felt in our borrowing costs if our credit rating changes. An increase in interest rates due to downgrading our AAA bond rating, just one step, would cost an extra $2.6 million in interest for $100 million borrowed. This is why we work so hard to achieve that credit rating and protect it. Now, let's take a look at where our rates have been in comparison to some historical measures. This graph shows the amount of change in a hypothetical $100 sewer bill from 2010 to today. The orange line is the average sewer rate increase Gilbert made in 4 of the previous 5 years, from 2005 to 2009. This line rises at 5.5% per year. That's actually lower than the 6% national average during that time. Now I'm going to add on the actual consumer price index, also known as inflation, during this time period. This is a representative indicator of purchasing power. So as an example, in 2019, you needed $120 to purchase something that would have cost $100 in 2010. Now, the Arizona Department of Transportation has a construction index just for the last 8 years, which shows the hyperinflation that we've seen in the construction industry. This inflation index is an illustration of what has happened to our capital improvement plan costs, which have far outpaced any kind of rate increases over this time. Now, I'm going to add on our actual sewer rate increases over this time period. These have always been below both the national average and inflation. And this shows that our purchasing power as a utility has actually declined comparatively to our actual prices in the real world. Now that's all very interesting, but what does this really mean in real dollars and cents? When we fill in the amount of rate revenue that we have foregone in comparison to inflation, we find that we've missed out on $67 million in purchasing power over the last 14 years. That's nearly 1.5 years of rate revenue over that time period. If we did that same calculation for the construction industry, it's $133 million below what we have collected. This illustrates that our investment into the service have not kept pace with the cost of operations or of constructing improvements. But we have plans to rectify this. Council was initially presented with 4 funding options to meet the needs of the utility, and they have actually narrowed them down to these 2 that will be presented to you. These each have a version name that kind of gives a good brief description of what's actually happening with the option, a rough percentage of revenue increase needed in order to accomplish the funding option, an estimated residential bill increase, which is a flat fee for service for our residents. So it's a very close representation of what will happen for a bill. And then one of these options requires a bond in order to fund our capital improvement projects. So we'll share how much the bond is. And then because bond is debt, we share how much is actually required over the life of that bond in order to repay it. And then the last 2 columns are a good measure of our ongoing capability after the 5-year period in order to continue to meet the needs of the utility. So that is available funding in our operating fund and in our repair and replacement fund to continue to do capital projects. And then in orange, I just share with you the 5-year average for those last 2 columns as a kind of a measuring stick to gauge the effectiveness of each of these options. The first option is called the cash option. It does not require any debt because we collect enough rate revenue to pay cash for all of our capital projects. It requires a $29 residential bill increase in April. It does provide the most ongoing funding for projects beyond our 5-year plan out of all 4 of the options that were presented to Council. The second option is called the phased cash bond mix, which requires a $110 million bond to fund many of the capital projects. But that bond allows for a smoother transition to higher rates with an $8 increase this April and a $6 increase the following year. It is likely that this option will require additional increases in the outer years of the 5-year plan in order to provide enough ongoing funding for projects after the initial 5-year plan. We'll come back to these options later for you to review. As I mentioned earlier, that residential impact, here's another way to look at it. They range from $29 to $8 in this spring. We can't forget that we also have the second year of the 3-year water rate plan that Council approved. And that second year is going to be implemented this April. And so you can see the full estimated residential bill impacts when combined. Those increases range from $20 to $41 a month in April. Similarly, our commercial customers have a separate rate structure. It is very similar in construction to our water rate structure, where there is a base fee and then there's a flow charge based on the amount of water that is used indoors and therefore flows down into our services, into our sewer service. And so you could see those comparisons of each of those options for our commercial customers as well. Now, lastly, reclaimed water service is a part of this fund. And so we have 3 separate types of reclaimed customers, and therefore they have 3 separate rate structures as well. Now, these reclaim rates might seem insignificant to a typical homeowner, but these are large users, and their bills can add up to $10,000 a month. So these will be impactful to them. Because of that, we notified all of our reclaimed water users by special letter back in June, notifying them of this rate increase process that we were going through and directing them to our utility rates website in order to have the most up-to-date information available at the time that they were planning their HOA fees for the following year. As I mentioned earlier, we started this process with the Public Works Advisory Board. They're that council-appointed group of residents from Gilbert whose mission is to review and make policy, capital, and rate recommendations to the council from the perspective of the residents. This group went through months of review of the wastewater plans, operations, and capital needs to understand what is needed to continue the standard of service that our customers are accustomed to. They went through the rate options and weighed their values for making a rate decision on which option to recommend. Ultimately, they decided to recommend the all-cash option to the town council. Their main concern was not kicking the investment can down the road, and in also dealing directly with the needs so that we are not saddling current and future customers with debt, thus resulting in the cash option recommendation. The Public Works Advisory Board had a tough decision, and the one motivating thing that they kept coming back to was the needs of the utility. So I just want to remind you of what these rate dollars go to do. They are the building blocks of our services. They support the proactive maintenance and replacement of the infrastructure that's the foundation of our way of life. And these dollars also help us respond to the emergencies when the infrastructure does fail. Without additional funding, we will lose ground on the proactive maintenance, and we'll have more frequent and more impactful failures, which will be disruptive to the community and more costly, even in the short term. Now, these are the rate options that are under consideration for the wastewater service, for sewer service. There's one more rate recommendation that I haven't mentioned yet. You might have caught on to it. The Environmental Compliance Fund. This is our stormwater and air quality service. Our main takeaway from this slide is that we're on budget. We have a plan for the outer years that don't look like they quite balance. There's a couple of large CIP projects slated for those last 2 years of this plan, and currently we have a limited scope on those. But we know that with a greater scope, once it comes into focus, we will be able to allocate those costs out, which will bring both of these funds into more alignment. One last recommendation that the Public Works Advisory Board made was to continue the utility bill discount program, which we launched on August 1st. You can learn more about that on our website or by clicking on that QR code with your phone. Lastly, you all have taken your time out to learn about these services, and now we want to hear from you. We want, if you would be so kind to share your feedback. There is a feedback form. This is a different QR code than previously shown, or you can go to our website and find that feedback form. We want to hear from you, and we'll share the results of that feedback form with our town council. All right. We've gotten through all of this presentation, and now it's time for your questions. So I want to close with this comment. These rate discussions sometimes can get sidetracked by percentages and spreadsheets. I want to provide a reminder of the life impacts that the services and the infrastructure provide for our community, both for today and for the next generation. We're able to enjoy parades on our streets and celebrate our Gilbert heritage because those before us have invested in our town. And our responsibility is to keep paying it forward by reinvesting in what they've built so that our kids and our grandkids aren't saddled with a crumbling hometown. And with that, are there questions that you have that we can clarify at this time? While we're waiting for questions to pop up, one question that we've heard and we've noticed a lot on social media is apartments. Are they getting away without paying their fair share? And the simple and honest answer to that is no, they're not. They're not getting away with not paying their fair share. The residential rate is charged to apartments based on the number of units in their apartment complex. So that residential rate of currently about $33 a month that all of our single-family residential customers paid is also paid on a per apartment basis for those complexes. So if there's a complex that has 150 apartments in it, they pay $150 times the $33 a month every single month for their sewer fee. So they do pay their fair share on the sewer fees. Not seeing any comments popping up in the chat or any questions. Of course, if you think of a question that comes to mind after this event is over, you can always email that to utility.rates@glbrt.gov. You can go to our website at glbrt.gov/utility-rates, where we have all of these presentations. We've got the rate study online there. It shows all of the financial details for the 5-year financial plan for the wastewater fund. Also the calculation of the new rates that are presented for council. And on the website, we also have a utility bill calculator where you can see the actual impact for each of these two options for your personalized bill. All you have to do is punch in your level of service, what type of water service you have, the amount of water you use, and it will calculate your current rate and the proposed rate for each of those two options that are still under consideration. And then I think lastly, I just mentioned that our council rate adoption is planned for February 11th. And if they adopt one of these rate increase options, they will go into effect for bills that you will receive beginning in April. And with that, it looks like we still don't have any questions. So we're going to close up here. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing your feedback on the feedback form.